programming that African American women are actually consuming. So there's one thing that it's reality TV, but there are lots of different types of realities. They're not all created equal. So, and of course, if you looked at Nielsen, you could get the real data, but we did ask questions just to see if we saw any differences of consumption patterns among African American and Caucasian women, and we did. So the ones that, so during our watch party, we showed people clips. So we have an understanding of which reality shows garner which reactions. And so ones like Love and Hip Hop or The Housewives of Atlanta, or even America's Top Model to a degree, Basketball Wives, there's some shocking images. There's some things going on that could paint African American women in a negative light. Well, those are the shows that African American women are actually watching. And when you look at what Caucasian women are watching, they're not even watching those shows. So they're, on one hand, they're not seeing it, so you can say yay, but on the other side, it's that African Americans are consuming this content that could be that they could say is about depicts themselves. And so maybe it's not surprising that they think that they would say that reality TV is where they're least portrayed the best. In fact, African American women are likely to perceive depictions of themselves in the media more negatively. So I think that follows, it seems to be very logical. So when we looked at the total sample, we saw that people were actually in the middle. They said that 40% said the images are neither positive or negative. I know Dr. LaPree can shed light on what she believes the interpretation of that data is. But then when you break it down by African American Caucasian women, you see that 72% of African American women say that these are negative images, compared to 41% of Caucasian women who say neither positive or negative. So there seems to be an impact. So another quote, "It's not just some sort of evil plan by the people in charge. We sometimes feed into it. Some of these shows are run by African American producers. The majority of the audience for these shows are African American, and they're entertained by it. As long as there's a market for it, people are going to want to be in that market and play up those stereotypes." And that's just true. Worked in media for 10 years, Michelle Lee's here. She gets it. You look at the data, and of course, and we've got Lizette, she's the client. Like our clients hold us accountable. They want to make sure that the eyeballs are there. And so we just have to think about that and recognize that it's not an evil plan. I thought that was the interesting part of the quote, that it's just dollars and cents. Another quote, the visit from Ava DuVernay. "The visibility and representation are so scarce that there is a real necessity for authenticity, that you feel these characters are multidimensional, full-body people. So often the representation of people of color is very one-dimensional." And that's what we saw in the data. When millennial women overall were asked to describe themselves, they were likely to use positive words. Of course you'd use positive. If someone said, describe yourself, you would say, fun came up, cool, awesome, weird, active. However, the words selected to describe African American women in the media strike a different tone. And so words like peaceful and kind and loyal and honest were not selected as frequently as corrupt and lazy and argumentative. So 45% said that the images they see of African American women in the media are corrupt. 46% say lazy, and 60% say argumentative. You look at what you're seeing, it's not, it's very parallel. I mean, it's logical. This perception, again, is more pronounced among African American women. And so argumentative African American women, 65% use that description versus 56% of Caucasian women. 54% said lazy versus 39% of Caucasian women. 50% said corrupt, 39%. So that's interesting, right? So this will be something that Dr. LaPree can really address. But it seems that these images that we're watching, because we're the ones watching them, are having some type of impact on how we perceive ourselves. The majority of millennial women believe, so we also want to know, okay, this is what you think, but is it true? Do you think these images are actually accurate? And so we found that, again, this was one of those, maybe 59% said some of the images are realistic. 18% said most of the images are realistic, compared to 23% who said few images. And then when you break that down by race, unsurprisingly, well, it could have been surprised, but 37% of African-American women said that few. So African-American women at least were more likely to say that, hey, a lot of these images aren't true. But when you look at some, that's where the majority of people, they think that, you know, this probably is, there's some truth to what we're seeing in the media. We also want to know, is there an impact? So after you look at these images, what's your comfort level with African American women? And so we asked, after viewing these images, are you likely to laugh and have fun with African American women? Yes, 70%. Work together on a team or project, invite to a party. So there's comfort there. But what was interesting is the less likely to invite to your parents' home or to your home. So while I think on some level, it's like I'm comfortable, but you know. So from a marketing standpoint, it's not just the message we have to get right, it's also about the medium and where we're showing our support with our dollars. And so again, we're in the industry, we understand that there's one thing, there's the creative end in terms of what we say and what we talk about, but it's the places, it's the media side that also is important. Where are we placing our dollars? And we have an impact. Esther Terrell Franklin's not here, but she's also a part of this movement and played a significant role in helping work with some of the media buyers when some content or a show was on TV and we thought that it didn't need to be there. So there is something that you can do. So what we want to do, in addition to understanding the descriptions, we wanted people to associate that descriptor with a channel. And so what we found is that Caucasian women believe African American women are depicted most positively in scripted television and in movies and films. And so I thought this was really interesting. So scripted television gets adjectives like successful, kind, peaceful, independent, loyal, honest, creative, and ambitious. Movies and films, the same, successful, kind, creative, ambitious. And then we also recognize they're watching different shows. So the shows that they're watching, the movies they're viewing, they're actually seeing some reasonable images. However, African American women are likely to see both the negative and positive. So scripted television got successful and kind and independent and loyal, but it also got argumentative, lazy, corrupt, fake, and dependent. Movies and films, the same. Social media was interesting. Creative, success. You saw more positives in social. That's interesting. It was something we talked about on the panel last week about how social media is empowering. And so that's an opportunity area. And then blogs, a creative place. Both groups believe that African American women are portrayed most negatively on reality TV and local cable news. So what was interesting in the data, where Caucasian women were not watching reality, they're watching the news. And it's the news where they're getting a lot of those negative images. Argumentative and lazy, and the same against unscripted for TV, local and cable. So the last part about this is we wanted to also think about this thing called fake news. And so Connie was like, we gotta ask some questions. And so, because that's connected, right? It's like what you're seeing, is it real? Is it not? And in current days, it's taken on a whole different dimension, but that wasn't our intent when we actually put it in the study. While the majority of millennial women believe what they read and see in the media, many question its accuracy. So about 50% say mostly I believe, and then 39% said no. Overall, I don't believe what I read or hear in the media. And so Connie actually said, media literacy will help people to better see the realism of these characters in shows, in ads, and reported by the news. And so, because it's again, if we know that they're on social, they're watching, they're consuming this media, what do they think? And so we found that 77% expect to find fake news in social media articles and posts, 61% in online websites and blogs, and then 45% on word of mouth. And what's notable about this is TV is one thing, right? Because it's you're projecting out. Social, you can't control. So we have to really think about how to help these African American women, or women in general, and even the guys too, just think about how they're consuming and thinking about fake news. The main social media platforms, just in case, you've got Facebook, and then Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, but I'm sure you know a lot of that, but they're actually in these spaces. They have created some strategies to determine the validity of these news and information. So they're looking to see if this story is fake, but they acknowledge that additional help is needed to decipher what is real or fake. And so while 35% say they know what's real or fake in the media, others say schools should teach. They want help themselves, and they think that parents need more information. And so we want to work our circle of influence to reach those in media production and the other people, our other pool of people who have the ability to write scripts, to greenlight something, and this is Dr. Rochelle Ford of Syracuse who's saying this, so we can get a whole lot of other images out there to counteract the negative ones and create balance. We heard, this is the last part of the study that we're sharing today, we heard from young women. They said they want these images to dimensionalize. Not all African American women are fake and ratchet. It's time to portray them as they are, not social stereotypes. They want to humanize. Treat them with the same sympathy that you have for white women. Show us some other news, too much negativity. They want to diversify. Refrain from cookie cutter images. Show more variety of skin color and hair textures. Empower. Make them strong, independent women. And then lastly, include. Have more African American women in decision-making roles. So this is just a part of the study. That's a synopsis that is going to help frame this conversation that we're about to have with our panel. And so I guess I will ask, who I can answer. Did any of these research findings surprise you? Was there anything that you're like shocked, or was it all pretty much confirmed? Anyone?
I'll let you guys go first.
So it's funny, I walked in here and I was talking to Charisse, and I said, it was like the water is wet study, all right? And she's like, I know, but we have to convince people that water is wet, so we need to do these studies. And I think the interesting thing was, no, it was not surprising. I think the thing that was most not surprising was that Caucasian Americans specifically didn't have a strong opinion as to whether the media images were realistic or not, right? They didn't have anything to draw upon. You think about that, and we look at other stats, like the average white American lives in a neighborhood that's 74% white and has a social circle that's 91% white. They don't have a cultural exchange to draw upon to understand whether or not the depiction is accurate. So they're left in this very odd place of it could be, but I don't really know any black people, so I don't know. And so it's really interesting to see that and to correlate some of the other statistical data that we've seen in the space. And really, that's all the more reason that we need to ensure that there's balanced images in the media.
And I'll respond to that quickly. The uncertainty of the realism of the images, or the uncertainty as to whether they're positive or negative, I argue might also be a phenomenon of experimenter bias, right? So they may actually believe that they're good or that they're bad, because, you know, statistics. But they're also hesitant to say that, right? Because they're in a space where, you know, anything I say about an out-group might be wrong. And so instead of saying, oh, I'm going to take a side on this, they could be distancing, right? So it could actually be a process of the study itself, of the mechanisms of research. Because I would make a point to say there's a thing called cultivation theory. And it's the idea that television and consistent media content cultivates norms of reality. So the more time you spend with televisual reality, the more likely you are to say that reality is like televisual reality. And there are hundreds of studies that demonstrate this. The more time you spend with television, the more likely you are to say that women are happier in the home. The more likely you are to say that older people are sicker and they're fewer, which is actually counter to science, right? So we see but we don't see robust elderly characters on television. We always see them as a joke to, you know, sell some drink or something. So we only ever see them in a distance unless it's Betty White. But that gets internalized. And even though we may not want to acknowledge it, it has an effect, period. And more importantly, and I'll just throw out another key term for those taking notes for the quiz later, it's called the third person effect. And it's this phenomenon where we say, oh, media doesn't affect me, it affects other people. Commercials don't affect me, it affects other people. The more you agree with that statement, the more likely you are to be affected by media, because you are not acknowledging its impact on you, and therefore you are not being literate, right? And therefore the information gets internalized without question. So I think it's particularly, and to tie back to the statistics about what do non-black folks know about black folks, right? Vast majority of that is coming from media. And even if they say, I don't know if it's realistic, it's still getting internalized as data. And just to add another one, I believe 40% of white Americans have no black friends, right? So we could talk about numbers and percentage of their neighborhood. 40% of black folks, 40% of white Americans have no black friends. And just for context, 25% of non-white Americans have no non-white friends. But in that space, if this is the only information you have, whether or not you know it to be real, it's still getting internalized by your brain as data.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
So, because oftentimes it sounds like an opinion. So exactly how do these images, how does it happen?
Sure. So the psychological processes of us processing the world basically entails taking in data. We take in an obscene amount of data. And you engage with any, let's go with 2-year-old, you see how they're just sponges, right? You say one word and they're repeating it all day tomorrow. So our brains are massive computers that we still kind of don't know completely how they work, but we take in all of this data. And that data creates connections between constructs, right? So if we always see women as housewives, then, or excuse me, let's go with something less gender. If we see women always as homemakers, right? And therefore we see a woman and we expect a homemaker. Or if we hear homemaker, we expect a woman. We rarely see men as homemakers. Therefore, there's a connection, there's a cognitive connection between women and homemakers. Generally, that's called a stereotype. But on a larger neurological phenomenon, it's a cognitive connection. So if I say table, you say chair. If I say cookie, you say milk, whatever the case may be. All of those are cognitive connections. But when they refer to people, they're called stereotypes. And we create this association just by the data we consume, and often outside of our control.